Chapter 90. Rick Dale was trying to keep it together, but everything seemed to be falling apart. The maturity gene was a disaster, and worse, Biogen was getting sued by a lawyer in New York, who was smart and unscrupulous. Rick's attorneys told him to settle, but if he did, it would bankrupt the company. Although that would have probably happened anyway, Biogen had lost the Burnett line. They had failed to replace it with cells from Burnett's kids, and now it looked like a new patent interfered with their product, rendering it worthless. At Dale's request, his wife had come out of hiding and returned to town. The kids were at her parents' house in Martha's Vineyard for the summer. She was going to get custody. His attorney, Barry Sindler, was himself facing a divorce, and it didn't seem to have time for Rick these days. There was a big uproar over all the gene testing behind being done for custody cases. Sindler had been widely denounced for pioneering the practice deemed unethical. There was talk in Congress of passing laws to limit genetic testing, but observers doubted Congress would ever act because the insurance companies wanted testing, which was only logical, given that insurance companies were in the business of not paying claims. Brad Gordon had left town while awaiting trial. It was rumored he was traveling around the rest, getting himself into trouble. Rodriguez's law firm had presented Biogen with the first part of their bill for more than $1 million. They wanted another $2 million on retainer. In light of all the pending litigations the company faced, Rick's assistant buzzed him on the intercom. "Mr. Dale," the woman from BDG, the security company is here to see you." He sat up in his chair. He remembered how electrifying Jacqueline Mara was. She radiated sexuality and sophistication. He felt alive just being with her, and he hadn't seen her in weeks. "Send her in." He stood up hastily, stuffed his shirt into his pants, and turned to the door. A young woman of 30, wearing a nondescript blue suit and carrying a briefcase, came into the room. She had a pleasant smile, a chubby face, and shoulder-length brown hair. "Mr. Dale, I'm Andrea Woodman of BDG. I'm sorry I haven't been able to meet with you earlier, but gosh, we've been so busy with other clients the last few weeks. This was the first I could come. I'm so glad to make your acquaintance." She held out her hand. He just stared. "Cavemen preferred blondes. Anthropologist notes rapid evolution of light genes. Are blondes really sexier? A new study by Canadian anthropologist Peter Frost indicates that European women evolved blue eyes and blonde hair at the end of the last ice age as a way to attract mates. The hair color gene MC1R evolved 7 variants around 11,000 years ago." He notes, "This occurred extremely rapidly. In genetic terms, ordinarily, such a change would take close to 1,000,000 years. But sexual preference can produce rapid genetic change. competitions by women for males, who were in a short supply due to early death in harsh times, led to the new hair and eye color. Frost's conclusions are supported by the work of 3 Japanese universities, which fixed the date of the genetic mutation for blondes. Frost suspects that blondes have sexual appeal because light hair and eyes are a marker for high estrogen levels in women, and hence greater infertility, but not everyone agrees with this view. Jody Kidd, 27, the blonde model, said, "I don't think being a blonde makes you more ripe for sexual activity. Beauty is much deeper than the color of your hair." Professor Frost's theory appeared in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior. His research was corroborated by a WHO study that predicted the demise of blondes by 2202. Subsequent reports contested the results of the WHO study after a UN's panel denied its accuracy. Chapter 91. Frank Burnett walked into the starkly modern offices of venture capitalist Jack Watson's shortly after noon. It was as he had seen it on previous visits. The Mies furniture, the modern art, a Warhol painting of Alexander the Great, a Koons balloon sculpture, a Tansy painting of mountain climbers that hung behind Watson's desk, the muted phones, the beige carpets, and all the stunning women moving quietly, efficiently. One woman stood beside Watson, with her hand on his shoulder. "Ah, Frank," Watson said. He did not stand. "Have you met Jacqueline Mara?" "I don't believe so." She shook his hand. "Very cool, very direct. Mr. Burnett. As you know, our resident tech genius, Jimmy Maxwell," Watson nodded to a kid in his 20s, sitting at the back of the room. The kid had thick horn-rimmed glasses and wore a Dodgers jacket. He looked up from his laptop and waved to Burnett. "How are you doing?" "Hi there," Burnett said. "I asked you to come in," Watson said, shifting in his chair, "because we are very nearly finished with the entire business. Miss Mara has just negotiated the license agreement with Duke University on extremely favorable terms." The woman smiled, a sphinx-like smile. "I get on with scientists," she said. "And Rick Dale," Watson continued, "has resigned as the head of Biogen. Winkler and the rest of the senior staff have gone with him. Most of them face legal troubles, and I am sad the company will not be able to assist them. If you break the law, the company's insurance policy does not cover you, so they're on their own." "Unfortunate," Jacqueline Mara said. "So it goes," Watson said. "But given the present crisis, the Biogen Board of Directors has asked me to take over and put the company back on its feet. I have agreed to do so for an appropriate equity adjustment." Burnett nodded. "Then it all went according to plan." Watson gave him an odd look. Yes. In any case, Frank, nothing more prevents you from returning home to your family. I am sure your daughter and grandson will be happy to see you." "I hope so," Burnett said. "She's probably angry, but it'll work out. It always does." "That's right," Watson said. Still seated, he extended his hand, wincing a little. "Everything all right?" Frank said. "It's nothing. Too much golf yesterday. I pulled something. but it's good to take time off from work. So true, Watson said, flashing his famous smile. So very true. Chapter 92. Brad Gordon followed the crowds that swarmed toward Mighty Kong, the huge roller coaster at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. He'd been visiting amusement parks for weeks now. This one was the biggest and best in America. He was feeling better. His jaw was almost completely pain-free now. The only thing that bothered him was he had had one conversation with his lawyer, Johnson. Johnson seemed smart, but Brad was uneasy. Why hadn't his uncle paid for a first-rate attorney? He always had before. Brad had the vague feeling that his life was on some sort of knife edge. But he pushed all those thoughts aside as he looked at the track far above him, and the people shrieking as their cars went by. This roller coaster, Mighty Kong, with more than 400 feet of drop, it gave plenty of cause for people to scream. The line of eager ticket holders buzzed with anticipation. Brad waited, as well as was his custom, until two very cute young girls got on line. They were local kids, raised in a milk bottle, healthy and pink-skinned, with little budding breasts and sweet faces. One girl had braces, which was just adorable. He stayed behind them, happily listening to their high-pitched, inane chatter. Then he screamed with the rest of them as he took the fantastic drop. The ride left him shivering with adrenaline and pent-up excitement. He felt a bit weak as he climbed out of the car and watched the girls round little buns as they walked away from the coaster, toward the exit. Wait, they were going again? Perfect. He followed them, getting on line a second time. He was feeling dreamy, catching his breath, letting his eyes drift over the soft curls of their hair, the freckles on their shoulders revealed by their halter tops. He was starting to fantasize about what it would be like with one of them. Hell, with both of them. When a man stepped forward and said, "Come with me, please," Brad blinked, guilty from his reverie. "I'm sorry. Would you come with me, sir?" It was a handsome, confident face, one encouraging him, smiling. Brad was instantly suspicious. Often cops acted friendly and polite. He hadn't done anything with these girls. He was sure of it. He hadn't touched them. Hadn't said anything. "Sir, please, it's important if you would step over here. Just over here." Brad looked and saw to one side some people wearing what appeared to be uniforms, maybe security uniforms, and a couple of men in white coats, like people from a sanitarium. And there was a television crew, or a camera crew of some kind, filming. And he suddenly felt paranoid. "Sir," the handsome man said, "please, we very much need you." "Why do you need me?" "Sir, please." The man was plucking at Brad's elbow, then grabbed it more forcefully. "Sir, we get so few adult repeaters." adult repeaters. Brad shivered. They knew. And now this guy, this handsome, charming smooth talker, was leading him toward the people in the white coats. They were obviously onto him, and he tugged free. But the handsome man held on. Brad's heart was pounding, and he felt panic flood through him. He bent over and pulled his gun from its holster. No, let go of me. The handsome man looked shocked. Some people screamed. The man held up his hands. Now, take it easy, he said. It's going to be... The gun in Brad's hand fired. He didn't realize it had happened until he saw the man stumble and start to fall. He clutched at Brad, hanging on him, and Brad shot again. The man fell back. Everybody was screaming all over the place. Somebody shouted, "He shot Dr. Bellamino! He shot Bellamino!" But by then, he was very confused. The crowd was running away. Those cute little buns were running. Everything was ruined. And when more men in uniform yelled to him to drop his gun, he fired at them too. And the world went black. Chapter 93. At the fall meeting of the Organization of University Technology Transfer Officers, LUTT, a group dedicated to licensing the work of university scientists, philanthropists, Jack B. Watson gave the stirring keynote address. He struck his familiar themes: the spectacular growth of biotechnology, the importance of gene patents, keeping Badal in place, and the necessity of preserving the status quo for business prosperity and university wealth. The health and wealth of our universities depends on strong biotech partners. This is the key to knowledge and the key to the future. He told them what they wanted to hear and left the stage to the usual thunderous applause. Only a few noticed that he walked with a slight limp, and that his right arm did not swing as freely as the left. Backstage, he took the arm of a beautiful woman. "Where the hell is Dr. Robbins?" "He's waiting for you in his clinic," she said. Watson swore, then leaned on the woman as he walked outside to the waiting limousine. The night was cold, with a faint mist. "Fucking doctors," he said. "I'm not doing any more damn tests. Dr. Robbins didn't mention anything about tests." The driver opened the door. Watson climbed in awkwardly. His leg dragging the woman helped him in. He slumped in the back, wincing. The woman got in on the other side. "Is the pain bad?" "It's worse at night." "Do you want a pill?" "I already took one." He inhaled deeply. "Does Robbins know what the hell this is?" "I think so." "Did he tell you?" "No." "You're lying." "He didn't tell me, Jack." "Christ." The limousine sped through the night. Watson stared out the window, breathing hard. The hospital clinic was deserted. At this hour, Fred Robbins, 35, and handsome as a movie star, was waiting for Watson with two younger physicians in a large examining room. Robbins had set up light boxes with X-rays, electrophoresis, and MRI results. Watson dropped heavily into a chair. He waved to the younger men. "You can go. But Jack—" "Tell me alone," Watson said to Robbins. 19 fucking doctors have examined me in the last 2 months. I've done so many MRIs and CAT scans. I glow in the dark. You tell me." He waved to the woman. "You wait outside too." They all left. Watson was alone with Robbins. "They say you're the smartest diagnosticians in America, Fred. So tell me." "Well," Robbins said, it's as much a biochemical process as anything. That's why I wanted—" 3 months ago," Watson said, "I had a pain in my leg. A week later, the leg was dragging. My shoe was worn on the edge. Pretty soon, I had trouble walking upstairs. Now I have weakness in my right arm. Can't squeeze toothpaste with my hand. It's getting hard to breathe. In 3 months. So, tell me." "It's called Vogelmann's paralysis," Robbins said. "It's not common, but not rare. A few thousand cases every year. Maybe 50,000 worldwide. First described in the 1890s by a French. Can you treat it?" At this point, Robbins said, "There are no satisfactory treatments." "Are there any treatments?" "Palliative and supportive measures. Massage and B vitamins. But no treatments. Not really, Jack. No." "What causes it?" "That we know. 5 years ago, Ender's team at Scripps isolated a gene, BRD7A, that codes for a protein that repairs myelin around nerve cells. They've demonstrated that a point mutation in the gene produces Vogelmann's paralysis in animals." "Well, hell," Watson said. "You're telling me I've got a genetic deficiency disease like any other. Yes, but how long ago did they find the gene? 5 years? Then it's a natural for gene replacement. Start the coded protein being made inside the body. Replacement therapy is risky, of course. Do I give a damn? Look at me, Fred. How much time do I have? The time course is variable, but—" "Spit it out. Maybe 4 months." "Jesus!" Watson sucked in his breath. He ran his hand over his forehead, took another breath. "Okay, that's my situation. Let's do the therapy. 5 years later, they must have a protocol." "They don't," Robbins said. "Somebody must." "They don't. Scripps patent the gene and license it to Bernard Berghoff, the Swiss pharma giant. It is part of a package deal with Scripps. About 20 different collaborations. BRD7A wasn't regarded as particularly important." "What are you saying?" "Bernard put a high license fee on the gene." "Why? It's an orphan disease. It makes no sense to—" Robbins shrugged. "They're a big company. Who knows why they do things? Their licensing divisions sets fees for 800 genes that they control. There's 40 people in that division. is a bureaucracy. Anyway, they set the license high. Christ. And no laboratory anywhere in the world has worked on the disease in the last 5 years. Christ. Too expensive, Jack. Then I'll buy the damn gene. Can't. I already checked. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Any sale by Bynot has to be approved by Scripps, and the Scripps Office of Tech Transfer won't consider. Never mind. I'll license it myself. You can do that. Yes. And I'll set up the gene transfer myself. We'll get a team in this hospital to do it. I really wish we could, Jack, but gene transfer's extremely risky, and no lab will take the chance these days. Nobody's gone to jail yet over failed gene transfer, but there have been a lot of patient deaths, and Fred, look at me. You can get it done in Shanghai. No. Here. Fred Robbins bit his lip. Jack, you have to face reality. There's less than a 1% success rate. I mean, if we had done 5 years of work, we would have the results of animal tests, vector tests, immunosuppressive protocols, all kinds of steps to increase your chance of success. But just shooting from the hip, that's all I have time for. Shooting from the hip. Fred Robbins was shaking his head. $100 million, Watson said, for whatever lab does it. Take over a private clinic out in Arcadia. Just me. Nobody knows. Do the procedure there. It works or it doesn't. Fred Robbins shook his head sadly. I'm sorry, Jack. I really am. Chapter 94. The overhead lights came on in the autopsy room. Bank after bank. It made a dramatic opening shot. Gorovitch thought. The figure in the lab coat was distinguished looking in a severe way. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He was the internationally renowned primate and anatomist, Georg Eriksson. Using a handheld camera, Gorovitch said, Dr. Eriksson, what are we doing today? We are examining a world-famous specimen, the putative talking orangutan of Indonesia. This animal is said to have spoken in at least 2 languages. Well, we shall see. Dr. Eriksson turned to the steel table, where the carcass was draped in a white cloth. He pulled the cloth away with a flourish. This is a subadult or juvenile Pongo abeli, a Sumatran orangutan, distinguished by its smaller size from the Borneo orangutan. This specimen is male, approximately 3 years of age, in apparent good health, with no external scars or injuries. All right, now we begin. He picked up a scalpel with a mid-sagittal incision. I exposed the anterior musculature of the throat and pharynx. Note the superior and inferior belly of the omohyoid, and here the sternohyoid. Eriksson was bent over the animal's neck. Gorovitch found it difficult to maneuver for a shot. What do you see, Professor? I am looking now at the stylohyoid and the cercothryoid muscles here and here, and this is quite interesting. Ordinarily, in Pongo, we find the anterior musculature poorly developed and lacking the fine motor control of the human speech apparatus. But this creature appears to be a transitional case, bearing some features of the classic pongid pharynx and some features more characteristic of the human neck. Notice the sternocleidomastoid. Gorovich thought, sternocleidomastoid, Jesus. They would have to dub in a voiceover. Professor, perhaps you could say it in English. No, the terms are Latin. I don't know the translation. I mean, can you explain in layman's terms for our viewers? Of course. All these superficial muscles, most of which are attached to the hyoid, that is to say, the Adam's apple. These muscles are more human than ape-like. What could account for that? Some mutations, obviously. And the rest of the animal, is it more human as well? I have not seen the rest of the animal, Erickson said severely, but we will get there in due time. I shall be especially interested to inspect any rotation of the axis of the foramen magnum, and of course the depth of and arrangement of socli of the motor cortex, to the extent that gray matter has been preserved. Do you expect to find human-like changes in the brain? Frankly, no, I do not, Erickson said. He turned his attention to the top of the skull. Running his gloved hands over the sparse hair of the orang's scalp, feeling the bones beneath. You see, in this animal, parietal bones slope inward toward the top of the cranium. That is a classic pongid or chimp finding, whereas humans have bulging parietal bones. The top of their heads are wider than the bottom. Erickson stepped back from the table. Gorovich said, So you are saying this animal is a mixture of human and ape? No, Erickson said. This is an ape. It is an aberrant ape, to be sure, but is merely an ape. John B. Watson Investment Group, for immediate release. John B. Jack Watson, world-famous philanthropist and founder of the Watson's Investment Group, died today in Shanghai, China. Mr. Watson was internationally lauded for his charitable work and his efforts on behalf of the poor and downtrodden of the world. Mr. Watson had been ill for only a short time, but he suffered from an extremely aggressive form of cancer. He checked into a private Shanghai clinic and died 3 days later. He is mourned by friends and colleagues around the world. Story details TK. Chapter 95. Henry Kendall was surprised that Gerard could help Dave with his math homework, but that wouldn't last long. Eventually, Dave would probably need special schooling. Dave had inherited the chimp's short attention span. He found it increasingly difficult to keep up with the other kids in class, particularly in reading, which was agony for him. And his physical prowess put him in another league on the playground. The other children wouldn't let him play. so he had become an excellent surfer. And by now, the truth was out. There had been a particularly distressing article in People's Magazine, The Modern Family, which said the most up-to-date family is no longer a same-sex family or a blended family or an interracial family. That's also last century, says Tracy Kendall. And she should know, because the Kendall family of La Jolla, California, is transgenic and interspecies, creating more excitement in the household than a barrel of monkeys. Henry had been called to testify before Congress, which he found a peculiar experience. The congressman spoke to the cameras for 2 hours. Then they got up and left, pleading urgent business elsewhere. Then the witnesses spoke for 6 minutes each, but there were no congressmen there to hear their remarks. Later, the congressmen all announced they would soon deliver major speeches on the subject of transgenic creation. Henry was named Scientist of the Year by the Society for Libertarian Biology. Jeremy Rifkin called him a war criminal. He had been exonerated by the National Council of Churches. The Pope excommunicated him, only later to discover that he wasn't Catholic. They had the wrong Henry Kendall. The NIH criticized his work, but the replacement for Robert Bellamino's as head of genetics was William Gladstone, and he was much more open-minded and less self-aggrandizing than Bellamino had been. Henry now traveled continuously, lecturing about transgenic techniques at university seminars around the country. He was the subject of intense controversy. The Reverend Billy John Hawker of Tennessee called him Satan incarnate. Billy Mayer, noted left-wing reactionary, published a long and much discussed article in the New York Review of Books entitled Banished from Eden: Why We Must Prevent Transgenic Travesties. The article failed to mention that transgenic animals had been in existence for 2 decades already. Dogs, cats, bacteria, mice, sheep, and cattle had all been created. When a senior NIH scientist was asked about the article, he coughed and said, "What's the New York Review?" Lincoln ran the Transgenic Times website, which detailed the daily life of Dave, Gerard, and her fully human children, Jamie and Tracy. After a year in La Jolla, Gerard began to make dial tone sounds. He had done it before, but the tones were mysterious to the Kendalls. Evidently, they were the tones of a phone-telephone exchange, but they failed to identify which country. "Where did you come from, Gerard?" they would ask. "I can't sleep at a rink anymore, ever since you first walked out the door." He had become enamored of American country music. "All you ever do is bring me down." "What country, Gerard?" To that, they never received an answer. He spoke some French, and he often talked with a British accent. They assumed he was European. Then one day, one of Henry's graduate students from France was having dinner at their house, and he heard Gerard's tones. "My God," he said, "I know what he is doing." He listened for a moment. "There's no city code," he said, "but otherwise, let's try." He pulled out his own cell phone and began to key in numbers. "Do it again, Gerard." Gerard repeated the tones, and again. "Life is a book. You've got to read it," Gerard sang. "Life is a story, and you've got to tell it." "I know this song," the graduate student said. "What is it?" Henry said. "It's Eurovision." "Gerard, the tones." Eventually, Gerard did the dial tones. The graduate student placed the call. His first guess was to try Paris. A woman answered the phone. He said in French, "Excuse me, but do you know of a great person who is named Gerard?" The woman began to cry. "Let me speak to him," she said. "Is he all right? He is fine." They held the phone by Gerard's perch, and he listened to the woman's voice. His head bobbed excitedly. Then he said, "Is this where you live? Oh, Mother's going to love it here." Gil Bond arrived to visit a few days later. She stayed a week, and then returned her alone. Gerard, it seemed, wanted to stay. For days afterward he sang, "My baby used to stay out all night long. She made me cry, she done me wrong. She heard my eyes open, that's no lie. Tables turned and now her turn to cry. Because I used to love her, but it's all over now." All in all, things were working out much better than anyone expected. The family was busy, but everyone got along. There were only two worrisome trends. Henry noticed that Dave had developed a few gray hairs around his muzzle. So it was possible that Dave, like most other transgenics, might die earlier than usual. And one autumn day, while Dave was walking with Henry at the country fair, holding Henry's hand, a farmer in overalls came up and said, "I'd like to get me one of them to work on my farm." That gave Henry a chill. There we Ebook extras. A conversation with Michael Crichton, author of Next. Question 1. Next challenges the reader's sense of what is happening, what is true, and what is invented. How much of what's in the book has already taken place? It's odd, but nearly everything in the book has already happened or is about to happen. The book does look to the future a bit, particularly with regard to some transgenic animals that become important characters. But for the most part, Next is not really speculative fiction at all. Question 2. What scares you the most about Next? And conversely, which possibilities do you find the most encouraging? I'm not really scared about anything in the genetic realm. My research actually reassures me, because I concluded that many of the things people discuss with great fear of great longing, such as designer babies or extended longevity, are probably not going to happen. I think that we'll have some remarkable new therapies from this area, and we will also find that the genome is vastly more complicated than we anticipated. In that sense, the genome is a bit like the human brain, much harder to understand than we once imagined. Question 3. What first sparked your interest in genetics? It's a long-standing interest for me. I studied genetics and evolution in college, and of course as a medical student. Genetics has been one of the most exciting areas of scientific research in my lifetime. It's hard to remember that when I was born in the 1940s, people weren't really sure what a gene consisted of, and they thought human beings had 24 chromosomes instead of 23, and they had no idea at all how an embryo grew and differentiated into a live birth. Question 4. In the past, you've said that you usually do research to answer a questions of your own that interests you. What was the origin of Next? Possibly for Powell's. This novel began when I attended a genetics conference at the Salk Institute in La Jolla. I learned just how fast the field was progressing, and how inappropriate certain legal positions were. The field obviously needed some broader attention from the public. In terms of the novel, the question I asked was the current view of how the genome operates? How do you get from genotype to phenotype? Because such ideas have changed hugely in the last decades. Of course, this question is ultimately the old nature-nurture issue. And so it is politically charged. How much of our behavior is ruled by genes, and how much by upbringing and experience? I ultimately concluded I couldn't really address this question in the book, because it is so complex. But I arrived at answers from myself that surprised and satisfied me. My answer is that genes are an integral part of our adaptive apparatus as organisms in an environment. So we find both heightened importance for nature and also for nurture. But the whole interaction is far more complicated than people thought 50 years ago, and it continues to change. Question 5. Next possesses many complex questions and presents the audience with many more gray areas. We have to stand on the ethics of genetic engineering, stem cells research, genetic therapy, and gene patents. I oppose patenting genes and argue such patents should never have been granted in the first place. The genome is our common heritage, going back millions of years, and it is absurd that anyone should own any part of it. I hope this book helps undo gene patents. The practice is obstructive and even dangerous. Genetic therapy is highly experimental. It has great promise and great hazards. Stem cell research is more a political football than a therapeutic issue. At this point, politically, it is a continuation of the abortion controversy that has rocked this country for nearly half a century, with no end in sight. What stem cell research will ultimately offer us is wholly unknown. It may be hugely powerful, it may be a dead end, but in any case, I oppose bans on research. They don't work and they displace the arguments, which become about the ban and not about the subject of the research itself. As for the ethics of genetic engineering, most people argue excitedly about what is not possible. If it were possible to pop genes in and out of embryos to make designer babies, then we would indeed have serious ethical questions to face. At the moment, that is not possible at all. I therefore don't think that talking about it does a lot of good. on major human life decisions. I don't think there is a great value in deciding what you will do until you are actually faced with the issue. For example, I think it is fruitless to speculate what you would do if you had a fatal disease. Eventually, we all get one, and our behavior at that point will probably not be what we imagined. Similarly, I think we don't know in advance how we will respond to opportunities in new technology. We just don't know. Question 6. What is the latest court ruling as to what constitutes cell ownership? Are there any upcoming cases that you're keeping an eye on? Rules regarding tissues are fragmented. Recent Sixth Circuit decisions regarding the tissue collection of Dr. William Catalona has set back the efforts of patents to have some control over what happens to their tissues once donated to medical research. There are good reasons why patients deserve such control. If you give your tissues for prostate research, you might not want the tissues used for other purposes you disagree with. You might have religious or other objections. You might have legal concerns because if your genetic information was published, your insurance might be cancelled. These are genuine concerns. Federal guidelines regarding tissues are much more humane, and they don't interfere with research. We need Congress to make these guidelines the law of the land. Question 7. One of your characters warns that science is as corruptible an enterprise as any other. Academics and entrepreneurs are way too cozy, and data can be massaged to achieve any desired results. Is this something the American public should be more aware of? I hope that such unsavory narratives as the Vox scandal will convince the public that we need better and more independent sources of information. But it is also true that the British slaughter of livestock at the height of the BSE scare now seems to have been unnecessary. The result of a flawed computer prediction. We are going to see more such errors in many areas of science. I believe we live in the greatest era of snake oil salesmen in the history of mankind. Unless government acts to assure us of independently verified information, we will continue to suffer bad science policies and even deaths. Question 8. How do you stay informed about current and cutting-edge science? How much do you read? Are you actively involved in the scientific community? There is no secret. I just read a lot. I don't talk to a lot of scientists. It's faster to read than talk. Question 9. Many of your previous books have ignited public discussions and debates. Do you think next will have provoked a similar response? I am never sure how the public reaction to my books will be. I'm usually surprised. I won't make any predictions about this book. Question 10. In 2005, you appeared before the United States Senate's Committee on Environment and Public Works to discuss the politicization of scientific research. What was your message? Why is this such a big problem? And what is the solution? Essentially, I argue that what we need is a government policy that assures independently verified information in any area that is important to policy. This is the essence of the scientific method. There are well established statistical procedures to make sure that the information you get is unbiased. It's simple enough to do, although expensive. But bad information is expensive, and bad policies are very expensive. I argue that we live in a technological society where science matters, and it is up to the government to make sure that what we're told is accurate. For this rather ordinary argument, I was thoroughly attacked. There are many people out there who don't want their data to be checked. Question 11. What's so striking about all your books and now next, in particular, is your ability to make complicated science comprehensible to a mass audience, while also showcasing your tremendous expertise. How do you pull that off, time after time? Again, there's no secret. Making the story clear is accomplished by rewriting and rewriting until the technical passages are understandable. In any book, there are usually a few pages that I end up rewriting, about 20 times. Question 12. After the final thrilling page, what would you most like readers to take away from next? The future is bright and exciting, and it will challenge us to think in fresh ways about our lives. But among our challenges today, we have some legal problems in genetics that need to be fixed. We need some laws passed and some laws changed. But I am optimistic about the future, very optimistic. Michael Crichton next audio interviews transcript. JB. Hi, I'm Jonathan Burnham, publisher of HarperCollins, and I'm here interviewing the best-selling author Michael Crichton about his new novel Next. Michael, as with many of your other novels, Next is a vivid dramatization of what can happen when cutting-edge science goes a little too far. Is Next a cautionary tale? MC. Well, I think it is in the sense that many of the books are, but for me, what's different about this book is that so much of it is real, or that so much of it is very thinly disguised versions of actual events that have occurred. Genetics, which is the subject of the book, has advanced extraordinarily rapidly in the last 15 years or so, and sometimes in directions that many people are troubled about or disapprove of, and so it is a very interesting and hot contentious area. JB. And have you been tracking the science of genetics for the last 15 years, watching it, seeing what's going on, and building a portfolio? MC. Actually, you know, it's odd. I was very interested in it at the time of Jurassic Park, which now, to my astonishment, was 15 years ago, and I lost track of it a bit. So to return is to have this odd sense of coming into a world where so many things that were fictional 15 years ago are now taking place. JB, you've chosen a very interesting and I think new form for this novel, which is to break down the conventional narrative into many different stories, some of which overlap, some of which are self-contained, and others which moved forward and become the principal themes of the book. How did you conceive of this book in formal terms? MC. Well, I think there were two considerations that I had. One was that I was unable to overlook the structure of the genome, as we are now starting to understand it, and how individual genes interact with other genes, or may seem to be silent, or we don't really know what they do, or sometimes they are repetitions that are not clear to us, and it struck me as an interesting idea to try to organize the novel in that way, even though it's not what one ordinarily does. The second thing that was driving me was the notion that there are a great many stories of interest in this area, and they're all quite different in terms of the legal and ethical problems that are raised in the field, so I wanted to do a number of different stories. JB next possesses a large number of ethical issues to the reader. Do you personally have a strong positions on these issues? MC: well, I do on some and not on others. The feeling in general that I have is that we have too little information, and the impulse in some quarters to ban things or prevent research or curtail it seems to me ill-advised, and also not very practical. Whatever research isn't done in the United States will be done in Shanghai. So what exactly is being accomplished? I do think that there are some things that have been done in a business sense that are tremendously bad and dangerous and inappropriate. And among those are the patenting of genes. We have within our bodies, for the most part, identical genes, and many of these genes are millions or even billions of years old. They are found in other animals, they are found in microorganisms, and yet they are being patented now. Diseases are being patented. Hepatitis C is owned by somebody. Haemophilus influenza is owned by somebody. The gene for insulin is owned. This seems to me to be very wrong on a number of levels, and I hope that this will be changed, and the book will be influential in starting a discussion. JB, you've written about many frightening areas of science in your novels. How does genetics rate in the large field that you've covered in terms of the elements of fear connected to reality that are built into it? MC: as a person, I think I am myself not very fearful, and it may be that I get out all of these fears in my work. The first sort of genetics book that I did that addressed any of these things was Jurassic Park, and that was, of course, entirely fiction. What's happened at this point is that many of these possibilities are real, and so you see, because of the structure and the way that things are being done. When you hear, for example, that scientists were reluctant to study SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, that was spreading across the world, a disease that had a 10% fatality and was certainly in 24 countries, and scientists hesitated to study it because there was a conflict over who would own the genome, who would get the patent. That was very scary. That business interest might put us all at risk for a pandemic. It's kind of insane. JB, how do you keep abreast of new developments in science? MC, for the most part, it's simply reading. I do visit occasionally laboratories, but not very often. And there are sort of two reasons for it. One is that when one goes to an individual laboratory, one spends time with someone who has a particularly strong interest in a very narrow area, which is usually not my area of interest. And the other things is that to read, it's the equivalent of talking to people on the telephone. It's just simply much faster. It's a much quicker way, and the journals stack up in my office, and I go through them as best I can. JB, your first goal as a writer, I'm sure, is to entertain, and you've done that brilliantly in this book. But in terms of asking readers to think about the issues that you're exploring, what do you want the reader to take away from next after they've finished it? MC. What my experience was in working on this was a kind of combination of anxiety and excitement. The possibility of really wonderful things that might happen, and the possibility that, for example, certain genetic diseases might actually be cured, and people who might previously either were certain to die or could only be treated in fairly unsatisfactory ways. There now is the likelihood that you will be able to inject the gene, and that person is cured. That's quite extraordinary. And there are many other examples of new cancer treatments and other things that are just amazing. And then on the other side, there is this connection of law and business and academia, which is very distressing in the directions that it's going. It involves a tremendous amount of secrecy and involves a tremendous direction, which I think is against the public interest, and which I think really ought to distress and frighten people. JB, if you were in a position to create legislation, how would you being to rein in the bad science, the combination of science, business, and academics, moving in the wrong directions as you see it? MC. I think there are actually 3 or 4 things that would really transform the field. The first thing that I would do is I would make the testing of genes for medical diagnosis completely legal, irrespective of patents. I think that would do a great public service and also oblige scientists to start to look at the patenting business in a different way. The second thing I would do is I would require universities to follow federal guidelines for use of tissues in research. Federal guidelines are excellent. They give people a tremendous amount of control over the tissues that they donate. Many universities, institutions of higher learning, are trying to break these rules, trying to go in another direction. They ought not to be allowed to, and I would change that. The third thing I would do is I would make sure people got the information that they needed to make informed decisions. There are some situations now where patients have died from gene therapy, and the institutions involved have said that they don't want the deaths reported because they're a trade secret. This is so insane, laughs, that the mind boggles this. Whatever legislation is needed to stop that, we ought to do. And the final thing is that in 1980, there was a law passed that was called Biodole, bipartisan law that enabled universities to sell their products to industry. And it was well intentioned, but it has had the effect of creating this gigantic commercial constellation within universities. That is very damaging, and so I would reverse that law. JB, in spite of the serious message of the book and the profound issues you're tackling, there's a lot of fun in this book. There are many jokes. There are many very amusing passages and stories. And there are a number of ideas, concepts, that perhaps are true or perhaps are fictional. Is there anything in the book that you would like to be real, that perhaps isn't real? That would improve your life, MC. Interesting question. I don't know how to answer that. I guess what I feel is that whatever I might imagine is probably right around the corner anyway, laughs. JB, absolutely. Thank you so much for this interview, and we are sure that this book is going to be a huge success. This essay breaks the law by Michael Crichton. The earth revolves around the sun. The speed of light is constant. Apples fall to earth because of gravity. Elevated blood sugar is linked to diabetes. Elevated uric acid is linked to gout. Elevated homocysteine is linked to heart disease. Elevated homocysteine is linked to B12 deficiency. So doctors should test homocysteine levels to see whether the patient needs vitamins. Actually, I can't make that last statement. A corporation has patented that fact and demands a royalty for its use. Anyone who makes that fact public and encourages doctors to test for the conditions and treat it can be sued for royalty fees. Any doctor who reads a patient's test results and even thinks of vitamin deficiencies infringes the patient. A federal circuit court held that mere thinking violates the patent. All this may sound absurd, but it is the heart of the case that would be argued before the Supreme Court on Tuesday. In 1986, researchers filed a patent application for a method of testing the levels of homocysteine, an amino acid in the blood. They went one step further and asked for a patent on the basic biological relationship between homocysteine and vitamin deficiency. A patent was granted that covered both the test and the scientific fact. Eventually, a company called Metabolite took over the license for the patent. Although Metabolite does not have a monopoly on test methods, other companies make homocysteine tests too. They assert licensing rights on the correlation of elevated homocysteine with vitamin deficiency. A company called LabCorp used a different test but published an article mentioning the patent fact. Metabolite sued on a number of grounds and has won in court so far. But what the Supreme Court will focus on is the nature of the claimed correlation. On the one hand, courts have repeatedly held that basic bodily processes and products of nature are not patentable. That's why no one owns gravity or the speed of light. But at the same time, courts have granted so-called correlation patents for many years. Powerful forces are arrayed on both sides of the issue. In addition, there's the rather bizarre question of whether simply thinking about a patented fact infringes the patent. The idea smacks of thought control, to say nothing of unenforceability. It seems like something out of a novel by Philip K. Dick or Kafka, but it highlights the uncomfortable truth that the Patent Office and the courts have in recent decades ruled themselves into a corner from which they must somehow extricate themselves. For example, the human genome exists in every one of us, and is therefore our shared heritage, and an undoubted fact of nature. Nevertheless, 20% of that genome is now privately owned. The gene for diabetes is owned, and its owner has something to say about any research you do, and what it will cost you. The entire genome of the hepatitis C virus is owned by a biotech company. Royalty costs now influence the direction of research in basic diseases, and often even the testing for diseases. Such barriers to medical testing and research are not in the public interest. Do you want to be told by your doctor, "Oh, nobody studies your disease anymore because the owner of the gene enzyme correlation has made it too expensive to do research"? The question of whether basic truths of nature can be owned ought not to be confused with concerns about how we pay for biotech development, whether we will have drugs in the future, and so on. If you invent a new test, you may patent it and sell it for as much as you can, if that's your goal. Companies can certainly own a test they have invented, but they should not own the disease itself, or the gene that causes the disease, or essential underlying facts about the disease. The distinction is not difficult, even though patent lawyers attempt to blur it, and even its correlation patents have been granted. The overwhelming majority of medical correlations, including those listed above, are not owned and shouldn't be. Unfortunately, for the public, the metabolic case is only one example of a much broader patent problem in this country. We grant patents at a level of abstraction that is on rise, and has gotten us into trouble in the past. Some years back, doctors were allowed to patent surgical procedures and sue other doctors who used their methods without paying a fee. A blizzard of lawsuits followed. This unhealthy circumstance was halted in 1996 by the American Medical Association and Congress, which decided that doctors couldn't sue other doctors for using patented surgical procedures. But the beat goes on. Companies have patented their methods of hiring, and real estate agents have patented the way they sell houses. Lawyers now advise athletes to patent their sports moves, and screenwriters to patent their movie plots. My screenplay for Jurassic Park was cited as a good candidate. Where does all this lead? It means that if a real estate agent lists a house for sale, he can be sued because an existing patent for selling houses includes item number 7, list the house. It means that Kobe Bryant may serve as an inspiration, but not a model, because nobody can imitate him without fines. It means nobody can write a dinosaur story, because my patent includes 257 items covering all aspects of behavior, like item number 13. Dinosaurs attack humans and other dinosaurs. Such a situation is idiotic, of course, yet elements of it already exist, and unless we begin to turn this around, there will be worse to come. I wanted to end this essay by telling a story about how court rulings hurt us, but the patent for ending an essay with an anecdote is owned. So I thought to end with a quotation from a famous person, but that strategy is patented too. I then decided to end abruptly, but abrupt endings for a dramatic effect is also patented. Finally, I decided to pay the end with summary patent free, since it was the least expensive. The Supreme Court should rule against Metabolite, and the Patent Office should begin to reverse its strategy of patenting strategies. Basic truths of nature can't be owned. Oh, and by the way, I own the patent for essay of letter criticizations of previous publication. So anyone who criticized what I have said here had better pay a royalty first, or I'll see you in court. The New York Times op-ed section, Sunday, March 19th, 2006. This has been Next by Michael Crichton. Hope you enjoyed the book. If you don't like the reading, go buy it yourself and see you later. And have a party float.